in this section that really grabbed my attention, Dr. Louise Irene Frey wrote a book, I guess, Freeing the Captives, the Emerging Therapy of Spirit Attachment. And I love this analogy that she said about souls are a little like substances suspended in water. The heaviest are after death sink to the lowest astral levels, the lightest float to the upper levels, and the rest find the appropriate levels in between. I resonate with that so much because as a medium, that's exactly what I experience.
Right.
Denser energies. I think of it as like, if we're physical on Earth, then just like we have a stratosphere, that denser energies are closer to the Earth plane in that stratosphere. Higher energies are in different levels of that stratosphere and then, on outward.
Right.
But I love, tell us a little bit about what you learned from her about spirit attachment, because that is actually something that I do as a medium, and it was part of my regression training as well.
Yes, well, she wrote a wonderful book, and she was a psychiatrist, and got into depossessing people. It's not from a religious perspective or approach. It's more from a psychological or psychiatric kind of approach. And what she says is that there are a number of different levels of spirit attachment, as well as levels of the non-physical planes, as you said. The heavier souls tend to stay around in what she called, I think, the astral plane, which is just the next place you would go when you release from your body. And so there are souls hanging around. The idea of haunted houses, or I had a friend who was very, very much in tune with spirits and so forth, and he would always tiptoe past the graveyard because he felt like there were spirits hanging around their graves and stuff like that. And what she said is that those kinds of spirits that do not travel to higher levels or less dense levels of the non-physical planes hang around buildings, and they hang around people, and they can actually invade a living person. It could actually be a relative of one of your relatives who attaches themselves to you. And she said that happens when people that they do become not necessarily possessed. I think she had two words. Possessed was like bad, really bad. And obsessed was a less influenced by the spirit, but not necessarily taken over by the spirit. So she had several different levels. She said it is possible to be totally possessed and, out of your mind, kind of just like, the Catholics who have priests who do exorcisms, that people can and do get totally possessed. But usually it's something a little less than that, according to her. And it happens when someone is vulnerable. They may be ill, sick, and weak in that way, or they, I don't know, they could ask for it too. I mean, it's somehow they've opened themselves to have someone, spirit attached to them, or even possess them. And I didn't really start this until she was about in her 60s, but she lived a long time. In fact, I noticed when I looked in my book that I've got the wrong date for her death. She was born in 1912, and she didn't die until 2014. And I think I said she lived 2014, 12 to 1914 to 1912 to 1914. She was 102 years old when she died. And yeah, so that's what I remember about her. And I also talked to another psychiatrist who did depossessions, Dr. Modi, who I think is probably still around. She is in West Virginia somewhere, but she's actually from India. And she's a psychiatrist, an MD. But her description of all that fit perfectly with what Dr. Ireland Frey said. So that, I don't know. What do you have any more follow-up questions on that? I'll try to answer them if you do.
Like I said, I relate to both what you were mentioning about the possession and obsession. I had an experience with that before I knew what I was really getting into. So I was glad to finally learn ways to be able to deal with it. And what I learned through my hypnotherapy training was similar to what she's talking about. And I don't know if you remember William or Bill Baldwin, who wrote a book about depossession.
I read a book by Martin Malachi, who was a Catholic priest. I don't know if he's still alive, who was very much involved in all that. And he, of course, approached it from a religious standpoint. Roman Catholics have priests who are doing exorcisms today, and they have a whole procedure for doing it. But that's the psychiatrists that I talk to do it from a more compassionate standpoint for the spirit that is possessing, because they may not really realize what they're doing. And what these ladies try to do, these doctors try to do, is get them to realize what they're doing and send them to the light. That's why I think the subtitle of her book was Freeing the Captives, because they're captive to this, what they're doing. They don't really realize. And it's interesting. I don't know if you're aware, I'm sure you're aware of the Monroe Institute up in Western Virginia, up near Wintergreen, where I used to have a house. But they have they did, I don't know if they still do, have a group of people that will go out and try to find stuck souls, out of body travel. And apparently it's quite common, and that these souls don't realize that they can go on from wherever they are. One example, and I don't know if I put it in this book or not, was when someone came across a sailor who was his ship had sunk, I think, in the Irish Sea, which is the sea between England and Ireland, and he had been attached to this life raft or whatever for like 100 years. Of course, in that in the other side, time isn't the same, but they finally coaxed him and got him to go to the light. And I don't know if I talked about it in this book or not, but I had
I remember that. Yeah.
In France, and did I tell you right about that in this book? Where, yeah, he inherited this castle. And when I say castle, it's like a big house. And I went and stayed there with him. And he said, when they were renovating the place, he kept hearing these sounds down in the basement, down in the cellar, I guess, wine cellar. And he finally got the workers to go down there and tear down this wall that looked through it. And there was a skeleton behind there. And the guy had been trying to get out for gosh knows how long. He thought he was apparently bopped on the head and bricked up behind this wall and didn't even realize he was dead. So those sort of things can happen, Carol. What do you think about all that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And, it takes fearlessness to be able to deal with those things. And I think because one of my first experiences when I finally accepted my gift as a medium was to experience what is called the 10th hell of the Buddha. And in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, only certain people are even allowed to work with what they call hungry ghosts, so the ones in the hells. And when I met the Buddhists who were doing the sand mandala at when they had it at the Stewart school, and they did a dance of the hungry ghost. So I went back the next day and I said to him, I've had this experience with the hungry ghosts. Maybe you can help me understand it. And then that's when they told me that only certain monks, it's evidently they discern which monks have a propensity to be able to handle that. And then they go through certain training, and only those monks are even allowed to do the dance of the hungry ghosts. So he looked at me and he said, "You must have been one of those monks in another lifetime."
Uh-huh. Interesting.
Yeah. So, I think for those of us who are not afraid to be able to deal with that kind of energy, that's a gift to our world to be able to help those people experience something other than what they're experiencing. And I find that there are many beings on the other side who are having awakenings, just like there are many people in our physical world who are having awakenings. I find that non-physical beings in the spirit world are also having awakenings. I feel like it has something to do with the growth of collective consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I love it that people are having trainings about these things, and I have a group that I work with, and it's been very powerful.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I think that really that idea of growth of consciousness, growth of human consciousness, is what what everything is all about. I mean, that's the evolution is what existence is about. We're all evolving. It is possible, according to Edgar Casey, to regress in a lifetime, but usually we're moving along. Sometimes it takes a number. Sometimes we can do it pretty quickly.
Yeah, my teacher called it devolving. Sometimes we devolve, and and maybe devolution is part of the earth journey, that we leave the divine, and in coming to the earth experience, there is a sort of devolution, leaving that divine energy to experience the earth experience, all kinds of experiences on earth. So, and in many cultures they talk about how, yes, it's lowering the energies until you get to a certain point, and then you begin to evolve your energies back to the divine. So I can relate to that. And when you mentioned the Monroe Institute, I haven't been out there yet, but I was surprised in your book about how he relates to these kinds of things that you were talking about with the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I had not read anything about him doing that in the past, so that was an interesting little tidbit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think the Tibetan Book of the Dead is, accurate to. I don't. It made sense to me anyway. But you know, I think that life is I describe it as a hero's journey. We leave our ordinary home, which is on the other side. We come here to this world that's so different and challenging, and we have I compare it to Dorothy, leaving Kansas and going to the land of Oz and having go through all her trials and tribulations and into the belly of the whale, which was the witch's castle. And then when she finally comes back, she's learned something, that there's no place like home, and that's what we're doing when we come here. We go through the trials and tribulations. We have to overcome difficulties and so forth. And if we do address the difficulties, do overcome them, and do have some successes, when we return, we're going to be on a higher level than when we left. So that's kind of the way I look at what life is about here on Earth.
Yeah, and the fact that, what is it, Glenda said to her, you had the power all along.
Yes, that's right.
And that's what we find out on this journey, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's a perfect metaphor, I think, for what life is about.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why in what I do, it's, I know I'm not here to convince anybody about what I believe, but I hold the energy for them to find their hero's way. And I really believe that every one of us has the ability to do that.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think we'd be here if we didn't. And it's a shame that some people take on a victim mentality or whatever and rebel, or what did you call it? Regress or degress or
Devolve, yeah.
Devolve rather than evolve. So yeah, but it does happen. But they'll get another chance.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, and I can relate to, I learned a lot of the things by experiencing them. So talking about the victim mentality, until I had my awakening, I felt like I was a victim, because of the childhood trauma that I had had. And even though I had sought counseling about it, I just couldn't shake it. And so I got to this place where I thought, oh, well, maybe I'm like Job, in the Bible, that I'm just supposed to suffer. And had forgotten about the last half of his story, that he suffered, but he persevered. And finally, he got to this place where he recovered everything that he had lost.
Right.
And then some. And so once I had my awakening, I began to realize, oh, I created this scenario for a reason. And that was very revealing.
Yeah. And I think we keep encountering the same kinds of situations, difficult situations, until we do learn to overcome them.
Yeah, like Groundhog Day, right?
Exactly like Groundhog Day.
Yeah,
That's
that's
another
such a
allegory.
great movie. Such a really great movie.
Yeah.
I know this is a sensitive topic, but I love the way you covered it. The question of suicide, and how that relates from the point of view of the afterlife. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, in fact, I've done some more research on suicide since then, and I think that people who commit suicide can have a difficult experience when they go across the other side. One of the things that we apparently all have is a life review, and we see what our actions have, and our words and so forth have impact they've had on other people, good or bad. And of course, suicide can have terrible impact on people. But one of the examples that I give in the book is actually a mutual friend of ours had when he was 16. Is that what you were thinking about that?
Yeah, that was one of the examples that you gave. Go ahead and tell that one. That's a fascinating story.
Yeah, he was spending the night, or a friend was spending the night with him, but he couldn't sleep because he had thought he had fallen in love with his friend's girlfriend, and his friend's girlfriend had indicated, back to him that maybe there might be something there, and he was trying to decide what to do, and eventually thinking, you just wished he had never been born, that he wasn't alive because it was such a terrible situation. And what happened is he suddenly felt like he was yanked out of his body. He was pulled up into the stratosphere. He could look down on the earth and see it. And he saw these little twinkling lights coming toward him. And the twinkling lights kind of came and surrounded him. And he asked, "Who are you?" And they explained that they were you and not you, that they were his guides. And I guess his guides like being part of him. And he said, "Well, why have you brought me here?" And he said, "Because we have something to tell you." And he said, "Well, what do you have to tell me?" He said, we want you to know that your life is your own." My life is my own? Who else would it be? No, your life is your own. You can do what you want with your life. And if you decide to end your life, you can do that and you won't be judged. And he said, "Well, what are you talking about? I'm not planning to end my life or commit suicide." "Well, yes, but if you had kept on the way you were going, you would have done it. And we want to say that's okay if you do that." When he said, "Well, aren't there any consequences?" And they said, "Oh, yeah, there'd be consequences. You just have to come back again and face the same kind of situation again until you get through it. So you'd be wasting time." And anyway, they explained a lot about what life was about, so forth, and he went back to his body and he did overcome the situation. He didn't get together with a girl, found another girlfriend. But the idea was that if you try to end your life because you're facing a problem that you don't want to have to deal with, you're making a mistake, because you're going to have to come back and deal with that problem anyway, eventually, until you get through it. And he also said that he thinks they did that because it was not the first time he had thought about suicide and actually gone through with it in a prior life. And he was back again, and they just didn't want him to waste any more time. So they clued him into what was going on and what would happen if he went through with it. So, but yeah, I think people need to know that if they've got a difficult situation and they just don't want to deal with it, suicide is not an option, because you're not only going to have to come back and do it again, but what I've learned more recently from psychics that have explained this to me, I've actually read a couple of passages by a college professor who has researched suicide with psychics like you, that are able to communicate with people on the other side, that not only are they going to have to eventually deal with it, but the problems that they cause for other people. I mean, it's I have a couple of friends whose children committed suicide. I have a woman that I work with whose son did. I have another guy, a neighbor of mine, lives just down the street, whose son committed suicide. The horrible repercussions to the family, and they feel guilty and so on. It's just, it's, and they have not accomplished, they only made the situation worse. So what do you think about that? You probably have firsthand experience with this.
That's an excellent point. It creates not just the karmic issues around the particular problem that makes one want to commit suicide, but there's all kind of entanglements that happen, like you say, because of the other relationships. And it's interesting that when talking about going back to when I was saying about feeling a victim, not long after I had my awakening, I had the experience of seeing that I chose my current life mother and father. and that I chose them because in another lifetime, I committed suicide to get away from them.
Ooh, interesting.
And yeah, and not only did I commit suicide, but I cursed them. So I was now attached to them, for two really strong reasons. The abuse in that other lifetime, the decision I made to commit suicide, thinking I could get away from them, and then cursing them. So very, very entangled energies. And the interesting thing I learned from that experience of remembering the in-between time just before coming into this incarnation was that, oh, I chose them. I chose them for that very reason, to have the opportunity to heal those past energies. And that shifted my relationship with my parents big time.
Well, now, and so you overcame it, but didn't you say that your father came to you after he had passed?
Yes, and I didn't have that experience until after he had passed. But because I do have that ability to, talk to him, I had, in fact, that's what caused me to write the book about all the conversations that I had with him, the things I learned from him, both about in his term, it would be called the Bardo because he was Buddhist, what I learned about hell and all those other phases in between, and then the other lives, um, and then the conversation was not just what I learned from him, but he was also learning from me, because I was devouring everything that I could get my hands on about various religions, including, I didn't study Buddhism before then. And so I had a lot more exposure to Buddhism afterwards. And then I was really keenly interested in reincarnation and how it worked. And so in our conversations, he would learn what I was learning.
Mm-hmm.
And that was having an effect on him on the other side. But my mother was still alive. And so that really impacted how I related to her. And I actually ended up becoming her caretaker towards the end of her life. And even though she was fundamentalist Baptist, so I could only talk about some of these things with her. I couldn't talk about all of them. And yet we we created bridges between our different beliefs towards the end that really made a huge difference. And because I now, is not afraid of death, and I was holding the energy for her when it was her time to cross over. And I had this amazing experience, moments after her spirit left her physical body. And one of the things in the Baptist church that I did like was some of the hymnals. And so I could hear her singing, I'll Fly Away.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so she sang that to me, like I said, moments after she passed. And then the next experience I had after that was, she came to me, and it was like I could feel her behind me. And she said to me, I had to leave because now you have work to do. And it was like all of a sudden the image of a mother bird pushing the baby bird out of the nest. And so again, tying to that, I'll fly away. Now she's saying, now it's time for you to fly,
Wow.
meaning to do what I was supposed to do. So, both of those and both of them have come to me, many times since they passed. My mom passed in 2016. My dad was in 1990. And his passing was actually what began my awakening, because I I knew he was at his funeral.
You knew he was there at the funeral, yeah.
Yeah. And I knew he wasn't happy about something. My dad was, my experience of him was as an angry person, in my youth. And so I knew what my dad's anger felt like, whether I could see him or not. So I knew he was very angry about something. And then uh, just a nanosecond, I looked over to my, the peripheral vision, and I saw he always wore a Masonic ring on his hand. And I saw that Masonic ring and the cut, the edge of his shirt sleeve and the edge of his jacket, and they were mismatched, and that was the way my dad dressed. And so I knew, okay, and it freaked me out. And so I said, I've got to get over my fear of ghosts. So that's what started all of this for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, let me ask you a question because I'm curious about hell. You mentioned that you learned about that, and I guess there are different hells, but and the only knowledge I have of that, it comes from Emanuel Swedenborg, who was a psychic who apparently could go back and forth. And but tell me what you learned about, if you can, without taking a few hours.
Yeah, that was, it shifted my whole thinking, because raised with the Baptist hellfire and brimstone, I was not expecting the hell to be what I experienced. And what had happened was I was in a meditation class. And now this was 2 years after my dad had passed. And I had been taking classes on how to communicate with spirits. And even though you have this gift, when you work hard to shut them down, you've got to work to open back up again. And so in this meditation class, it was interesting because my meditation teacher had trained with Herbert Benson. He was also a doctor, and he had trained with Dr. Herbert Benson. And Herbert Benson had shown how the effect of Buddhist monks chanting had a positive effect, physical effect on chimpanzees. And that night, Dr. Spano played the Buddhist monk music, the chanting music. He had not done that before. And that must have drew in my father. And all of a sudden, in this deep meditation, it was like the veil had been pulled back, and I could see my father's back. My father was a chef, and in this scene, his chef jacket was pulled down. That's what he would do at the end of the day to kind of cool off. And so you'd see the t-shirt, the narrow strap t-shirt. And so he was sitting like that in front of the Buddha of the 10th hell. The Buddha was sitting on it's called a king. It's like a sofa bed, but it's used as a sofa by day and a bed by night. And there's a special table, a scholar's table that's on it. And he had the pillows and everything. It was all in maroon and gold, typical monk colors, uh, high monk colors. And I remember there was 4 panels behind him showing the seasons. And so, just vivid detail. I could see the incense burner. It was interesting because I could hear noises. They were muffled noises around. And so I have a feeling that those were other people who were in suffering somehow. But what happened for me was that Dad thinking, okay, I'm going to be in hell forever. And he said, to the Buddha, is there anything that I can do to lessen my suffering, always wanting to bargain, right? And the Buddha said, and the Buddha turns to me, I'm like floating above. And the Buddha turns to me and points at me and he says, if you can help your daughter overcome her fear of ghosts, we'll let you out.
Whoa.
Yeah. And then that freaked me out because I didn't realize that the Buddha was aware of me. And then my dad turns around and he now he kowtows, prostrates. And he says to me, forgive me, forgive me. And I said to him, I forgave you a long time ago. I think it's about you forgiving yourself. Well,
Yeah.
then that's when that must have sunken in with him, because that was when this magical thing happened. The whole scene, as vivid as it was, pixelated. It just disappeared right in front of us.
Wow.
And then you know how in a movie it goes to fade to black?
Right.
And then a new scene starts appearing like through a fog. And the next thing I knew, he was at in front of this walled monastery. In front of this particular one had a moon gate, and it had blue and white urns on each side of the moon gate. And these monks came out. They had their saffron robes on, and they came out, but they put a brown robe over my father. And what that means in the Buddhist culture is to take refuge in the Buddha. And so they took him into the monastery, and mentally, I mean, they didn't say this to me, but telepathically, I knew that they were taking him in to do some healing work with him.
I see.
But the scene that just shifted how I thought about hell was how it pixelated.
Mm-hmm.
And what I knew, nothing was said, but I knew when that happened that hell is a construct, a mental construct. And so I began watching whenever I would see, especially lower energy spirits, what mental constructs they were creating around them.
I see. Well, let
Yeah.
me ask you this then. What do Baptists have their own little place they go?
I've never experienced another hell besides that particular one. But, there is a joke about um, somebody, getting a tour of the afterlife and walking by a doorway and hearing it's like a revival on the other side of the door.
Yeah.
you know uh, and the guide says to the person, now be really quiet, because they think they're in their own special, heaven or hell or whatever. And so that was it's a joke, but it's kind of telling that we create what we hold in our beliefs. And my dad didn't talk about his Buddhist beliefs, so I was really surprised that he actually created that for himself.
Yeah. 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 Well, that makes sense to me that we create our own surroundings and so forth, what we
Yeah,
think we deserve and so on.
yeah, and what it says to me is that, here we don't really give the afterlife. So this is one of the reasons why I think your book is so powerful. We don't really give the afterlife much thought.
Yeah.
But if we did, what would those thoughts do to create our next afterlife experience?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's definitely one of the reasons I wrote it.
Yeah.
Things that I'm
And
trying to do now with other books is wake people up to, we've been born into this materialist culture that's got it all backwards. I mean, the idea that you should, go through life and collect stuff and money, that's not going to, that's not going to make your your next life any better or your afterlife any better. It's going to make it worse, probably.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like we are, some of us are shifting out of a materialistic point of view, and the way that I tell people about how I sense collective consciousness is evolving and growing. I remember 34 years ago when I was going through my awakening, to be able to find organic food, you had to go to an organic farm or a little hole in the wall store. But now,
Yep.
34 years later, organic food is everywhere. And
Right.
I feel like that happened, ground up, a grassroots movement, and people became educated and started making more conscientious decisions. And I feel like we're doing this about our spirituality as well.
Yeah.
So
I think,
that gives me hope.
yeah, I've seen a big shift over the 30 years that I've been writing about this. And
Yeah.
no question about it. My first book that had to do with metaphysics was published in 1995, almost 30 years ago. And boy, I got all kinds of flack from people. And nowadays, I don't get much flack anymore. I get a little, but not a whole lot. I mean, 1-star reviews and so on. Just people, thinking that I'm blasphemous, but I don't get that hardly at all. Yeah.
I can relate to that. When I was talking about writing about my conversations with my dad's ghost, people would say to me, "Oh yeah, you're writing that woo-woo book." And some people, would cross their fingers and, when I cross their paths. But then other people, even if they said that in front of me, in kind of a teasing way about the woo-woo book, they would then corner me and say, "I've got a story for your woo-woo book."
Yeah.
So, but now we, can talk about it pretty freely without feeling like we're going to get persecuted, and so that's good. And I learned, one of the things that I learned back in early days was, be judicious about who you say these things to and how you say them.
Right. Right.
And so,
I don't bring it up with people. If they ask me, I'll tell them I'll answer their questions. But I
yeah.
learned not to, just don't bring it up. I mean, people, what's the old saying? I think it may even be a Buddhist saying. When the when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Yes. And in Taoism, there's that saying, and then there's another saying: when the student is really ready, the teacher disappears.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Isn't that cool?
that's right. Well, what
And
other questions you have about the book or anything else?
yeah, yeah. Someone in the group had this question and wanted to know more about your experience with Rosicrucians.
Yeah, well, I went through all of that. Gosh, probably in the '80s, so almost 40 years ago. I They have a whole course that you take. And at that time, I'm sure it's online now, but this was actually before the internet. I mean, it was like a mail order thing where you got lessons in the form of little books, and then they'd have exams. And what I can tell you is that what we've been talking about, they're simpatico with all that. Everything is energy, everything is vibrations, everything is consciousness. Uh, they're right there with the quantum physicists on all of that. And so they know what's going on. And according to them, they've been around for a couple of thousand years. Now, I don't know about that, but I know they've been around for several hundred years because some of our founding fathers were Rosicrucians. and he believed in reincarnation and so forth. And it's also, of course, goes back at least that far in Europe. So there, just as you can be any religion you want. Rosicrucianism is not a religion; it's a study of metaphysics. And if you want to be a Southern Baptist, you can be a Southern Baptist. If you want to be a Buddhist, you can be a Buddhist. But you know, their teachings are their teachings, and you take the courses, and you take the exams, and you get to different levels. And I went through it all for several years. Probably the only time I ever went to a Rosicrucian temple or whatever they call it. There's one in Washington, D.C. And I did go to that, just like a weekend kind of seminar sort of thing. But other than that, it was a mail order kind of thing. And I really learned a lot, and I'm glad I did it. And what I've done since, in talking to all these people that I reference in the book that we've been talking about, is just kind of solidify what I already knew from the Rosicrucians, and maybe expand on some things like hell and so forth. But yeah, they know what's going on. So anybody wants to do that, do it. And then, like I said, I'm sure it's all online. Man.
Yeah, and when I went to the Rosicrucian Center in San Jose last year, they had a wonderful statue of Pythagoras.
Yeah, well, they relate back to that's all of that is where they say they came from, and maybe it is true. I don't know. The Rosicrucian, also their symbol is a rose, and the idea is it's the unfolding of the rose is what they do. If you become part of that society, is you're evolving like the rose opening up from the bud to the blossom.
Yeah. Well, this has been really, really fascinating. So here's the question I wanted to end with. Since you wrote a book about the afterlife, how, and we're not getting any younger. So how do you feel about, or what do you imagine your afterlife will be?
Well, I feel like I have memories of my previous in between. And you talked about choosing your parents. I have kind of a memory of leaving my soul group to come here, and with them talking about what I was going to do, and you can do it, Steve, or whatever my name was then. And so what I feel like is that when I pass eventually, I figure I might have another 10 years or so, who knows. But when it happens, I'm going to return to that group. And they're my good buddies, my friends, that I will be welcomed by them, and I'll feel like I'm home, and it will be love all surrounding me. And so I'm kind of looking forward to it in a way. But that's what I think the afterlife. I feel like I have a soul group that is fairly well evolved. I'm still evolving, but they're evolving too, and we're all very compatible and simpatico. So, what do you think?
I like that imagery a lot. I feel something very similar. I have two entities that I communicate a lot with, and in every experience, my own personal experiences in the afterlife, they pop up. And so I have a feeling that yeah, they are my soul group, or my next higher selves. I don't I haven't gotten full clarity about that, but I do. And sometimes I play this game of what if, that in that soul group, we say to ourselves, what if? What if we do this? What if we do that? What if you decide to play the bad guy, the antagonist this time, and I'll be the protagonist, and all of that. So I like that a lot. I really do. And I think that's part of why certain cultures like to hold the energy for when someone is passing to help them connect more quickly with those beings.
Yeah, 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 that's right. And if people are interested, there's, what's the guy's name? I think he's passed away now, but it's Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls are two books that have a lot of about
Dr. Michael Newton.
Newton, yeah, about the time between lives. So, but I certainly resonated when I read those, and I may have been what triggered the memory of actually leaving that soul group to come to the parents I had, and I chose those parents, and the reasons why are too long to get into now, but it was the parents I needed to have this time, and I wouldn't be doing this if I hadn't had those parents.
Yeah.
My father was the son of a Methodist minister who was very spiritual, but not very wired into Christianity. He joined the Unitarian Church. And my mother, who grew up an Episcopalian, was kind of anti-religion because, I don't know, she, I guess, had some unfortunate experiences, but she was really upset about her husband's ancestor, who was one of the Salem witches and was hanged as a witch.
I remember that book. That was a fascinating book.
Yeah, yeah. So they were the parents I needed to have me open to spirituality or metaphysics, but not become a fundamentalist Southern Baptist in the meantime, that kind of exposure to religion. So they were the right parents for me.
Yeah. Well, that's so fascinating, and it makes me want to say to you, in case no one has said this to you before, I feel like you have accomplished what you came into this incarnation to do.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I have a feeling when you meet that soul group, they're gonna, give you a lot of attaboys and cheer you on and get ready for the next one.